No Opinions. My name is Josh, and today I have Mike on.
Hello.
And Derek on.
Hi, everybody.
So, in this episode, I wanted to discuss the differences between the Game Boy versus the Game Gear versus the more appropriate comparison, the Game Boy Color. And I thought, who do I know that actually enjoyed playing the Game Gear? Not to say it was a bad system, but I just didn't know a lot of people growing up who owned it. Now, that being said, sound guy Mike over here is like, I loved my Game Gear. And Derek, who has been on the show to talk about Batman before, has actually sent me pictures of his Game Gear and collection he still has.
Personally, I just never get rid of anything.
It's more of a hoarder situation than a collector situation. But before we get into that, let's go around and talk about little things we've been playing, little bits of news that have caught our eye. Derek, why don't you go first?
Okay. I don't have any news, but I recently listened to your series on Zelda, so that inspired me to go back. And I happen to have the little collector disc from when GameCube, I think it was, released like a collection pack, a promotional disc or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I went back on with my Wavebird. I love that thing. Playing the first Zelda, the original playthrough, and then the second quest playthrough. And then once I did that, because I'm procrastinating and not studying, I decided to pick up Zelda 2, Adventure of Link, which I may have lied to you before. Now, after playing it again, I don't think I ever beat that game because it is ridiculous hard. It is so hard. I have found, and there's not even any walkthroughs that I found online. Like the one walkthrough was nothing but pictures of like random maps and things, and I was like, this isn't helpful. So I finally found somebody on YouTube that apparently did an entire playthrough in 2 hours, which is
2 hours.
I will say this: it is about 2.5 maybe. I will say this: it is frustrating watching him do something. I'm like, oh, that looks easy, and then I'll go do it, and I'll die like 18 times.
Yeah, and I think
so hard, and he's not even as leveled up as I am.
Yeah,
I was just saying he wasn't even as leveled up as I am, so it's like, how is he doing this? I think the timing is slightly different because he might be actually playing on original Nintendo because some of the enemies don't move quite the way they do in that YouTube video.
Gotcha. So,
but anyway, that's what I've been up to.
Have you noticed, and I think we actually talked about this in the episode, have you noticed that there's just weirdly out of place like puzzles where you'll encounter something that's out of nowhere and then you'll never see it again?
Do you have an example? I mean, I think what you're referring to is things like in the beginning, there's like a thing where you need to find a mirror to give to somebody, and it's hidden under a table in one of the houses, but there's no like sprite or anything to let you know that there's something there. You just have to randomly come across it.
And you never have to look for things under the table at any other point. So
right.
It's just kind of weird and out of place, and it doesn't really go with, I don't want to say the normal game design, but
yeah, I think it's annoying that like they have the map and then there are just random tiles that are like side scrolling. You just like randomly fall into like I guess they call them traps or something, but like the fact that there's no inclination of like what 1x1 square is a side-scrolling area and what you just walk through in the overworld. It's kind of annoying, but...
Well, good luck.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to need it.
But, Mike, why don't you go ahead and talk about what you've been playing? I know you actually started something up some time recently, and little news that caught your eye.
Alrighty, well, I've actually been taking something of a hiatus from gaming. I just kind of needed to change my media up a little bit, so I've been doing more reading as of late.
Nerd.
Yep.
But... Whoa. What? Reading?
I know, right? Who does that? Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I didn't know.
What is it that Egon says in Ghostbusters? Print is dead? That was like 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I did very, very recently just get back into gaming with a very old game, actually. I finally started playing the Uncharted series.
It breaks my heart that a PS3 game can be referred to as very old.
It does kind of make you feel old, doesn't it?
It makes me feel super old.
But yeah, so I just recently started that up. I'm about a fifth of the way through. Not too concerned about spoilers, so I'm at the point where the seaplane just got blown up as you were flying into the island. I don't know if you guys remember. It's been a while.
I'm not sure. Did you beat that game, Derek?
I never played it.
Okay. And I played that game in 2009, So my memory, the thing I remember most about the first Uncharted game is guys sniping me from 40 yards away with Desert Eagles. This sucks. So have fun with that.
Sniping with Desert Eagles.
Yeah.
How the hell does that make sense?
They were true crack shots.
Yeah, they were some crack pots anyways. What else you got?
So that's my real big gaming news. Other than that, I have been playing Pokemon Go quite extensively recently.
Woo.
Yes, in the Dratini Community Day event, I managed to catch so many of those little buggers that I have the shiny versions of all 3 levels of evolution.
I'm so proud of you. Now, that being said, did all the shinies come with that special move?
Yes.
Okay. Derek, are you familiar with this?
Not really. I unfortunately let Pokemon Go a while ago. No pun intended, I guess. But
that was a lot of go right there.
I'm about to say, he's a go-getter is what he is.
Pokemon Go. Yeah, no, I was really into it for a little while I was in Champaign, but when I came up here, this isn't exactly, Champaign's a huge college town. There's a crap ton of people playing it, so it was not hard to find other people doing it. But up here, it's a different story. So like the boss raid battles and things like that are practically impossible. Plus, I've decided recently that trying to play games with other people, given my current schedule, just isn't a reality. So I had to, buckle down and stick to the ones that are something that I could get through and 100% without help from somebody else. So no, Pokemon Go has been off my radar for a little while.
You're a strong, independent gamer who don't need no man.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Not by choice.
But anyways, you are still going on. There's a community event coming up, too, for Bulbasaur.
Yes. I know you're not really a fan of dating episodes. So
don't do it. Don't say it. Just soon.
You just said...
I said soon.
Yeah, but that means that it has to be... this episode has to have been recorded before that date. People could look up when it was.
Okay, but that... Anyways, go ahead. Fine. Ruin the illusion.
You did it.
Shush.
But anyway, yes, there is a Bulbasaur Community Day event coming up very soon.
Thank you.
As well. And I will, of course, be partaking in that. I have, as of recently, even backed off of that a little more, but I think that comes in waves because you have to wait till the next amount gets released.
I'll say it comes in gens, and in this particular gen, they took the controversial, in my opinion, approach of breaking out the releases into little bitty baby waves, and that was lame.
Yes and no. I enjoy the fact that it gives you something to still look forward to in the game more frequently.
But it kind of, to me, was the whole season pass versus buying the complete edition. Because for me, the season pass for games, if it has to do with episodic content, I feel like I'm actually getting more by doing it as it's released. For Pokemon, I didn't feel like there was literally any benefit to me going out and getting these things when they came out. I was like, I can just wait 3 months and go out and actually play this game like I like to play it. That's my approach.
Yeah, but you're not a tryhard. I'm a tryhard.
I'm not a tryhard.
And I am most assuredly a Pokemon Go tryhard.
Woo.
I don't think I could deny that by any means. And, different strokes for different folks.
Yes, different folks indeed.
Yeah, I've been doing that a lot lately. Derek, you're a doctor type person. Do I have a brain thing happening?
Yes, you do. You have a brain.
Stupid?
And it is happening.
No.
No. I think technically, that would be called Broca's aphasia, but we won't go there.
Oh, that was like a real medical thing. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, no, what you have is not Broca's aphasia, but yeah, I'm just name dropping, really. Look at me, I'm smart. Woo!
I got the big brains.
Yeah, and I'm probably saying it wrong too. It might be Wernicke's aphasia. I always get those two mixed up.
One of them has to deal with being able to recognize things and use the proper word, and the other one is the other way, right?
Right. Yeah, I always remember Broca's broken. So Broca's aphasia is difficulty expressing the words, I think.
Gotcha.
Okay, well, I know lots of people who have difficulty expressing words, so I'll make sure to throw out these fancy $5 words next time they stumble over their discussions of the Game Lads and the Game
They're
Wars.
all yours. Oh, Lord.
The best. But do you have anything else, Mike?
I think that's everything for me. The only other piece that I would discuss would be the also recent Nintendo Direct thing where they mentioned the next iteration of Smash Bros., which is always phenomenal. Now, I know there's been some discussion as to whether it's just a port or whether it's a new game. I feel like I'll be excited either way, but obviously I am hoping for more content than just a port.
There is also some worry that that was actually more of a teaser for an invitation to an event because they used very similar imagery for an upcoming Smash Brothers tournament they're having. Like they used the same picture. So there's a worry that Smash 2018 was actually a Smash Brothers Invitational and not a game thing. The disappointment is real. I know you can't see it from here, Derek.
I can feel it though.
I was gonna say that I feel like that was heavy enough that even people listening to the episode will be like, "Wow, did it just get slightly colder in here?"
Yeah, life is less worth living right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
But anyway,
silence speaks volumes.
Yeah, it's the words you're not saying. It's like jazz.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Let's not go into that freaking jazz.
Anyways, so if you have nothing else, Mike, I have been playing the game Suikoden 2. It was a game recommended to me. It's a PS1 game. I'm playing it via emulation on my PS3. And despite it being a game that's almost 20 years old, it is a game I'm enjoying tremendously. I'm hoping to sink a lot of time into it because I still have quite a few games in my backlog. I'm looking forward to starting The Last Guardian or Neo. Derek, I know that you still need to get around to The Last Guardian, don't you?
Oh, yes, I have it, and I keep looking at it, and I know that until this big bad test is over, I can't be enticed by it, so it's been hard.
I've heard it's only about 12 hours long. That being said, I also have to be strong and make sure I don't buy that Shadow of the Colossus remake before I beat The Last Guardian.
Ooh, yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna have a hard time with that one too. But then again, the new God of War is calling my name too when it
Coming
comes
out 420, blaze it.
So.
Can you say that on here?
What, 420 blaze it?
Yes.
Why not? I just did twice. Are you asking if that needs to be edited?
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
No.
Well, you said that I had to edit out.
Denied.
Yeah, now you're dating the episode.
Well, I'm gonna have to cut it out that time too.
That's fine. No, you just can't say like
Denied.
that kind of stuff.
Wait, you can't say crap?
I'm on the fence about that,
It's
depending.
like you can even say crap on freaking television.
Yeah, it's weird. Just
You
as a
say
quick
frickin'?
aside, and Derek, I'd love to hear your input on this. Do you feel like over the last 15 years, the word crap got turned from a curse word into a not curse word?
I'm not sure that I ever really felt it was a full-blown curse word, but it has definitely dropped in terms of power, I would say.
Yeah, when I was young, that was a word we'd still get in trouble for saying. And now I'm seeing it on, like, kids' shows.
See, I would get in trouble for saying frickin', though, because it was just a substitute or surrogate for
Got it.
Well, see, that was always my argument. I had the opposite argument as a child. My parents would always be like, well, why don't you just say frickin' or shoot? It's because you know exactly what I mean. What does it matter? It's just a
Right.
stand-in. You hear it in your head with the word that I really mean. This is pointless. And then my
Exactly.
parents would go, no, you don't understand like social norms yet.
Yeah,
But
no.
you embarrass us when you do that. So talk like a child.
You embarrass us, now go to your room with no dinner. But
all these years later, and you're still embarrassing. Man.
yeah, well, that'll never change. I mean, I've known you for how long, Derek, and you're still embarrassing, right?
Well, you know,
Yeah,
some
about
things
to
you
say.
don't have.
Yeah, ain't that the truth, though? I mean, anyways, last bit of game news. This isn't really game news per se, but I had applied for a job at Supergiant Games, the people who put out Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre, all wonderful games. And I applied to be an office assistant / community liaison. Now, without getting too much into our personal lives, this probably wouldn't have been a lateral move for me. And I was a little worried about everything that would be associated with it, but I did get the first phone interview. That was exciting. But unfortunately, I just got the indication that they have chosen not to proceed forward with me, so I will not be continuing to interview for a job in San Francisco. So that's a bummer.
Yeah, because I hear San Francisco is so easy to live in.
I hear it's crazy
Right.
easy to live in. I hear the commute is a delight. And I hear the cost of living is surprisingly affordable for the fact they're all going to drown in the next 15 years. But anyways, no harm, no foul. I'll continue buying. If there is one thing, and I can say this because our listenership is about 40 people, and this isn't spiteful. This was just me being kind of a douche when I was thinking it. The guy who I interviewed with, he is the one who's in charge of actually shipping out merchandise. It's a very small shop, about 12 people. And he sent back the boilerplate. We appreciate your interview. We've decided to go with other candidates. I responded back very professionally. I appreciate the time. I hope you find the best candidate. What I considered tacking on there was, by the way, where's my merch I bought about a week ago? I know it should have been signed, but I don't see a shipping number yet. What's up with that? But decided it probably wouldn't be in my best interest. So
way to take the high road.
That's, you know me, man. I'm always like moral high ground.
Right.
But let's go
Right.
ahead and move into our major topic, our only topic, and that is going to be, we wanted to do a discussion of the Game Boy versus the Game Gear, because I know, as I've talked to more people, they have grown increasingly vocal about their love for the Game Gear, and I also want to compare it versus what would be a more fair hardware iteration, the Game Boy Color. Now, the Game Boy Color came out almost 7 or 8 years after the Game Gear, so that's an enormous amount of time. But before we get into the later comparison, when we were younger, Derek, why don't you go first? I want you to tell me your initial impressions of these systems. I'm not sure, I know for a fact you owned a Game Gear, but I'm not sure about the Game Boy systems.
So I never had an original Game Boy. Ironically enough, it felt like old technology by the time I got my first Game Boy Pocket. I don't know. I just remember thinking, holy crap, that thing's a brick. I equate it to the Nokia of handheld gaming systems, but never played on that. I never owned one. I remember playing on it thinking this thing is giant in my hands, but that was only because I had been used to playing on a Game Boy Pocket. I really liked my Game Boys. I spent a lot of time. I think I had like at least 2 Game Boy Pockets. I know I've had 3 Game Boy Colors, a couple of Game Boy Advances. So like I've had plenty of iterations. But I remember the big drawback for my Game Boy Pocket was that, you know, I was playing for hours, and you know, eventually the sun would go down, or you know, I'd be in a restaurant with my parents or something where the lighting was, you know, mood lighting, but I couldn't see anything. So I had one of those, you know, magnifying glass lights that you could just pop onto the top or whatever. But, you know, I would just be doing this for hours. So I think my big complaint with Game Boy was the fact that it wasn't backlit. Not that it even wasn't color per se, but that it wasn't backlit. But I did sink tons and tons of hours into some great Game Boy titles. I think the biggest one that comes into my mind would be like the original Pokemon, but I know I played Game Boy before that. I have some, like, you know, old Kirby games, some old Mario and Wario games, and just some really, when I think back about them, nostalgic classic titles. And then moving on to Game Gear, I feel like I spent more time on the Game Gear, probably if for no other reason, just because it was lit and it was color. And like you said, the next colored handheld wouldn't come out for almost a decade. But I know, you know, I'm no pioneer here when I say that the big issue with Game Gear, in my opinion, was the battery life. I do have a couple of stories about the Game Gear. So it took 6 AA batteries, right? Which
Yep.
It was heavy. First of all, it was heavy, but that never bothered me. I remember as I was reading up on it, it says the battery life for 6 AA's at the time with that device was about 3 hours ish, and I don't remember ever getting that much gameplay out of 6 fresh AA batteries. I remember it more like an hour at most. But
An hour?
no.
That doesn't seem right.
I mean, I could be remembering it wrong, but the point is that I had such an issue with game time and battery life that I obviously had. I think most people who had a Game Gear and wanted to play it had the AC adapter. Well, I was but a wee lad at the time, and you know, didn't know much about the physics of electricity or anything like that. So I vividly remember one time I was in a restaurant with my parents, one that we'd frequented often, so I spent lots of time there. So I had my Game Gear with me. I was playing this game, and I was sick and tired of, you know, the dreaded, you know, your battery goes out and you can't save anything or anything like that. But so I had this AC adapter. I found a little corner with an outlet, and I went to plug this, you know, it's a power block, is a huge AC adapter. And I must have had my finger in between the prongs.
Oh no.
When I plugged it in. Yeah, that was my first near-death experience, or at least the way I remember it. And I remember it was a tingly feeling. My whole body tingled after that for a good long time. But that was the day that I did not learn anything about Game Gear, but learned a lot about electricity. So moving forward, second story is that with my Game Gear, I was terrified of plugging it in. So my parents bought me, for good reason, my parents bought me the battery packs that you could recharge and then plug in. So, we were going to save hundreds of dollars on AA batteries at this point. So I remember being in, maybe I shouldn't say this, my father would probably not appreciate it, but
He's not
I was
gonna
in,
listen to this.
that's true. Okay, so I was in, there was a bar in the back of a liquor store that we used to go to. And the people that owned the liquor store had kids. So I was in this like back office of this liquor room that you could only get to by walking down, like literally it looked like a wine cellar. Like there's just wine everywhere.
Okay.
But anyway, we were back there playing for a couple of hours. All of a sudden, the thing started smoking.
The
And I was
thing
like-
being the battery pack?
Yeah, in my Game Gear, the thing started smoking, and I was freaking out. And we popped them out, and they were melting, the Game Gear and the battery packs.
Oh my
Don't know
god.
how it happened. Yeah, don't know how it happened. It was the craziest thing. But so the battery packs ended up being useless. But I did, and at this point, the battery packs were so big, you had to replace the battery compartment covers. So I didn't know where the battery compartment covers were because I had been playing with these battery packs for so long. So I went back to AA batteries, but had to hold them in there. And again, going back to my young understanding of electricity, made me nervous because I thought I was going to get shocked by 6 AA batteries.
It's funny in retrospect, but
Yeah.
you didn't
So
think to
those are my.
electrical tape cardboard over it or something?
I don't even know if I knew what electrical tape was at the time. I was lucky if I probably knew what cardboard was, to be honest. I was
Okay.
not a smart child.
Future doctor right there.
Future doctor.
I mean, hey, what are you going to do?
How to say if you
Electricity hurts.
It does. I still think about
Listen
that when
to
I'm
me.
plugging things in.
Professor Smart, fire hot.
Doctor, I need
Hey.
some way to get my kid to quit playing games. Have you considered electrocuting them?
Oh, jeez.
Does
Oh my
wonders
God, you
for
think my parents did it
classical
on purpose?
conditioning.
Oh, man.
About to say this is going to be a story for a while now.
Oh, great. It's like
Thank
when
you
the
for-
doctor, when the patient comes in and says, "Doctor, it hurts in 3 places," and the doctor says, "Well, don't go to those places."
All right, well, Mike, anything else from you, Derek, about your early initial impressions?
Oh, I think that's probably enough for right now, but I will definitely feed off of you guys.
Oh, certainly. Mike, I know that you had some Game Gear stories. Not a lot of Game Boy, I believe, but what's your history?
So you are correct. I never owned personally a original Game Boy. I was straight into the Game Gear. I believe I got my first Game Gear. It was when I was in kindergarten, so that would have been 92, 93, like a year after it initially came out in the U.S. But no, I never had an original Game Boy. I had some friends that had one, but I was never terribly interested because the technology was not great. The technology was crap. Like Derek was saying, it didn't even have a backlit screen. You couldn't use it unless you were like inside and under artificial lighting, which kind of defeats the purpose of a mobile system. So my parents thankfully did their research, and after much begging, they finally decided to buy me a handheld system, and they got me a Game Gear. And it was phenomenal. As my father said, it doubled as a self-defense device, because you could have beat someone to death with that thing.
And I find that curious that Derek was talking about how the original Game Boy seemed like a brick, but he loved his Game Gear.
Yeah, well, like I said, I was the child afraid of electricity, so some things didn't make sense and some things did.
Well, I hate to sound like an old man, but I am about to. It was heavy, but you could tell it was a quality item. Like,
Oh boy.
It was a good heavy.
It was well built. I remember once dropping that thing on I think it was my aunt's coffee table, and it left a dent, and my system was fine. It dented an oak coffee table and was fine. Like, I think my
Mine
brother
almost
dropped
caught
his
fire.
down a flight of stairs, and it was fine.
Mine almost caught fire, and the springs in the battery compartment were like melted and disformed. But it still worked. So I got to go with you on this one. It was built well. It was built to withstand even its own malfunctions.
Well, I mean, it's not like the Game Boys were built shoddily either.
Comparatively, though,
I feel like my Game Boy worked great consistently. Like, I don't feel like it ever had any kind of mechanical issues.
I remember hearing a lot of stories about the buttons getting stuck.
See, I don't remember. Now, that could just be because children are gross and got things stuck in it. Like, whenever people accidentally get, like, crumbs or soda in there, it just gets sticky.
Well, I suppose it could be true.
Possible.
I never had that experience. But now that you say it, I do realize that, wow, I totally just derailed my train of thought. I never had sticky buttons. But what I did hate
Never
about
had sticky buttons, Derek.
Shut up. We have children listeners. That's inappropriate.
Continue.
We probably don't have children listeners.
No.
But anyway, the one thing I will say in terms of like the way it worked, Game Boy was totally reliable. Whereas the Game Gear, like the old Nintendo games, sometimes you had to like turn it on and off real fast or get the cartridge. Like if the cartridge was dirty, like it wouldn't work. Sega Genesis was the same way. It's not like today where you can reliably pop in a CD or a cartridge and it works every time you turn the switch on.
I was about to say that's true. You did sometimes learn some early lessons about how to romance the cartridge.
Jiggle it slightly to the side, hold it right there.
You blow it in the right way. Like, lessons that would come in handy later in life.
Romance it.
Did blowing it come in handy later for you, Wheeler?
Damn, Skippy.
About to say, there's some lonely nights, Derek.
And by the way, Derek, this is 2018. So are we about to learn that not only are you a doctor that didn't know what cardboard was, but you're a doctor who's also sexist?
Bigoted.
We'll use bigoted. That's even better. You bigoted doctor, you.
No one
go see Dr. Sonnenberg. He's a bigot.
I am neither of those things. I was just merely commenting on what you had said. I was just making sure that I understood it clearly. More power to you.
There, you clearly understood. So, sorry, we've completely derailed what you were talking about, Mike. To get back onto your sturdy machine.
My sturdy machine, sexually adventurous. Okay, now we're back. Okay. Anyway, yes, it was a very, very well-built system, and the Game Gear was just, as we were just discussing, so ahead of its time. It came out in 91 and had a backlit color screen that had much higher resolution, I believe.
Oh, significantly higher. I mean, just doing a quick... So, first off, these numbers are laughable nowadays. Oh, yeah. The resolution for the Game Gear was 160 by 144 pixels, but it had a 4096 color palette with 32 colors displayable on screen. Compare that to the Game Boy that had, it was a similar pixel resolution, but it didn't have any color. It was just different shades of off green. So they had comparable resolutions, but the difference in the color palette made all the difference.
I hated that green sepia tone crap. Like, even if it was monochromatic, like, it was awful. So whenever they took away that green and brown-ish tone for Game Boy Pocket and further non-colored Game Boy iterations, which I guess would have been only that one, and it was black and white, much more enjoyable, at least for me.
But, Mike...
I mean, I think that covers everything for the Game Gear. I don't want to get too much into the games right now. I will say there was one other story that I always relate about the Game Gear, which was it did have atrocious battery life. Mm-hmm. I mean, all of that tech did come with a price, and it was typically the main time that my brothers and I would use the Game Gear when we were younger is when we were going on family car trips. And we used to make a triangle around the eastern side of the U.S. visiting, and each time you'd spend about 9-10 hours in the car. To make it 9 hours in the car with our Game Gears running, my mom would buy a 24-pack of AA batteries, and then my brother and I would each make sure that we had fresh batteries in our Game Gear before we got in the car. So with 3 sets of fresh batteries, we could just make it 9 hours.
Now, see, that's mind-blowing for me, because first off, this is something that I'm not 100% sure how I didn't put together till right now. I don't know where I got my Game Boy from. I just remember having one. I vaguely think my dad might have kicked out his roommate when he lived in the area back when I was younger. He might have kicked out his roommate because he didn't pay rent, and he just kept all of his stuff because the guy never paid rent. So he kept his Game Boy and all his Game Boy games. And that might be how I got my Game Boy.
Yay, free stuff.
I guess. But
I vaguely remember how I got my first console, but I don't remember how I got my first handheld either.
Yeah, strange. I remember how I got my first console. I remember how I got almost all of my consoles, but the first portable, I just remember suddenly I had a Game Boy.
Okay, no, I was very
Just
aware.
materialized.
I think it's because my
Yeah.
parents wanted to make sure that I was very aware.
It's like, this is for you. Don't you ever forget it.
Don't you ever forget it, and don't you ever let anything bad befall this item at any point in time. Like, I think that's why I remember so vividly dropping it on the table and it being fine. It's because I thought briefly, I had that little slowdown moment as you were watching it fall where time slowed down and you watched your life about to end. So my father's going to kill me when this hits the ground. And then bam, and it picked it up completely fine. Did anyone see that? No, this never happened.
I mean, rightfully so. They were not cheap. I was astounded when I looked back and saw that like they went for like $150 in the US and the Game Boy was only like 90.
That is correct. The Game Gear, when it came out in North America in April of 91, retailed for $150, whereas the Game Boy, mind you, significantly less advanced for its time. When that came out in late July of 89, I didn't know they were out in 89,
Yep.
but that was only $90. So,
Yeah.
Well, considering it's not even double the price, but it took the Game Gear system a decade to catch up technologically, I feel like is also you were getting a great value considering what you were getting.
you were, and we'll get into this more in later points, but when I can remember playing a Game Gear once as a child, and that's because I went to one of my cousin's house, and he's like, oh, hey, I have a Game Gear. I'm like, is that the thing that's basically a handheld Sega? Yes. Do you have Sonic on it? Yes. I want to play Sonic. And that is the only time I remember playing a Game Gear. I do remember thinking this, like, wow, this thing fits on my entire lap.
Yes. Oh yeah, let's also not forget the fact that it had a far more comfortable controller layout than the Game Boy. Now, downside to that is that it was slightly less mobile because it was bigger, so you either had to have a carrying case for it
Or a flatbed truck, or...
backpack. You needed some kind of bag for it. You couldn't just carry it in your hand or in your pocket like you could with not so much the Game Boy. It was kind of big to fit in your pocket, but certainly the Pocket Edition was far easier for the mobile gaming standpoint, certainly, than the Game Gear was.
Oh, and I would like to state, because I had trouble finding it earlier, the original Game Boy had a color palette of 2 bits, 4 shades of gray, from light to very dark olive green. So, yeah, right. Visually, there was absolutely no question that the Game Gear was leaps and bounds ahead of the Game Boy. And this is coming from a guy who I did own a Sega Genesis. I didn't own a Master System. I owned a Genesis. And I struggled to find games that I thought were good, unique experiences on the Game Gear. Now, I looked up a few, and I know you guys have some written down, but for the Game Boy, just off the top of my head, that's where we got the first Kirby's Adventure. That's where we got the much better Kirby's Adventure 2. That was also where 2 very strong Super Mario Lands. The first Super Mario Land was not good. I don't know. Did you guys ever play that?
I did not.
I did. And I agree with you. It was not great. It was almost like a throwback to like where Mario began in like Donkey Kong days. And 2 was just so way superior.
Oh, 2 was better in absolutely every way. The first game, now mind you, the first game came out in 89. It was one of the launch titles for the system, but it looked like what calculator games look like for us. Like
Exactly.
It wasn't good or pretty, or like it seemed like they didn't know how to make it at all. Like it didn't even evoke a Mario feeling.
Yeah, it didn't even look like Mario.
Not at all, but the second Mario game, not only did that introduce a unique approach to level progression, but it also had unique power-ups, and it introduced a major character in the Mario franchise of Wario. That was the first time he'd been introduced.
Nice.
And the third Mario game, Super Mario Land 3, you actually got to have Wario as a playable character, which not only had entirely different gameplay than the first few Mario games, but also introduced a treasure hunting aspect, which I love treasure hunting aspects. So, or last but definitely not least, a couple jokes have been made at my expense about this actually. The Game Boy had Zelda Link's Awakening, which is a phenomenal Zelda game. A Zelda game that I have played so many times that I almost have the map memorized. Derek, were you aware of that? Yeah.
Was I aware of the fact that you had the map memorized?
Yeah, there was a point where somebody, and this is a long time ago, this is anecdotal at best, but somebody asked me, they're like, hey, I need to get from this area to this other area. Do you know where I'm supposed to head? And I was just happened to be in the room, and I go, oh yeah, you go 2 screens to the right and 3 screens up. Oh my God, you were
Wow.
spot on.
Okay, no, I didn't know that you knew it that well.
Yeah, that I got some crap for that one, but it's a really good game because not only is it a new adventure, but it introduces some mechanics that were new to the series at the time. Now, mind you, it was basically just it was a approach to the Link to the Past type gameplay, but they introduced enough new stuff that it was a unique experience. Anyways, my experience with the early handhelds was entirely on the Game Boy, and I think at this point we can actually talk about how in 98 the Game Boy Color came out, because we're not going to touch on the Pocket, because the Pocket was just another iteration of the Game Boy. It was a sleeker Game Boy, it had a cleaner screen, but it didn't hardware-wise bring anything new to the table. So the Game Boy Color, on the other hand, not only could it play games with a much stronger color palette, specifically, let me find it here real fast.
While he's looking at that, Mike, I got a question for you that I think we skipped over. Do you remember how loud the Game Gear was?
Yeah, I remember.
Like, comparison to the Game Boy, it was booming. It could really pump out some sound.
Yeah, I was actually thinking while we were talking about it, I was thinking about how iconic that coming on noise was, that da-da, Sega.
Yeah.
That was quite loud. I remember if you turned it up all the way, you could annoy pretty much everyone in the car, because it would give off quite a bit of noise. It was really technologically, it was so far ahead of its time.
And it's interesting you mention that, because I would love to be able to get the specifics of this, because for the sound, all it has for here is the sound chip, and it's like Texas Instruments.
Yeah, calculator.
Yeah, this means very little to me. But the Game Boy, on the other hand, the original one, 2 pulse wave generators, which sounds awesome, but it says 4-bit wave sample. So that while we did have some very iconic music, I can't say whether or not the music was strong of its own right or it's a nostalgic kind of strong. There are people who are much more musically inclined who could make that distinction. I am not one of them. But it's interesting comparing because I did find the Game Boy Color's resolution versus palette available, and the resolution was the same as both the Game Gear and the Game Boy, but the color palette was still inferior. The Game Gear was able to display 32 colors on screen with over 4,000 colors available, whereas the Game Boy Color only had 15-bit. It still didn't, well, actually, palette colors available 32,000, but I don't think as many could be displayed at the same time. So,
yeah, no, it was.
I think
overall, it was still the color was not nearly as crisp as what you got on the Game Gear. And I would point out that even a decade after the Game Gear came out, not quite a decade, I think it was actually 7 years between the two when the Color came out, still not backlit.
That one was not backlit, and I will give you that. However, Derek, you had something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think when the Game Boy Color came out, it was still annoying that it wasn't backlit for sure. But the technology in the Game Gear was not exactly perfect either, because I remember it had a contrast adjustment, and different games you had to adjust it differently, and different lighting you had to adjust it differently. Like you could go all the way from completely whitewashed to basically the screen was black. And I remember having some difficulty playing some titles because I just couldn't see really well because of the contrast issue. And like in the middle of something, I'd be doing something really intense, and then my finger would accidentally hit the wheel, and I couldn't see anything, and I didn't know why. And it was either the system had died because of the battery life, or I accidentally bumped the contrast wheel or something and mess up my playthrough. And I remember being frustrated with that. So the fact that the Game Boy Color didn't have, is it less customizable, I guess. I don't know if that could be seen as a downside, but it was nice for me because I didn't have to worry about it.
Well, I would call it more idiot-proof.
Well, and that's what I was about to say, like, not to be derogatory, because you see this
Which
a lot.
is why I needed it.
Well, and that's the thing, like, you see that with a lot of quote-unquote newer technologies, is when they're first introduced, they give you an insane amount of options, and then the more people who have them, they're like, we're just going to keep paring back what you can do so you can break it less.
I think for most people, like you were saying, and with the iterative process, it gets better each time, so they keep trimming away the fat, as it were. Mm-hmm. These are the options, 95% of people don't use. These are the features 95% of people don't use. Because if you take those features away, like you said, if they're not using them anyway, they're only there for them to be able to potentially break it.
Yeah, right. Nobody wants that. But one thing I wanted to mention is that the last bit of the comparison is, I know it's, if you, like Derek said earlier, this is not revolutionary, but it took 6 AA batteries for 3 to 5 hours of gameplay. I never heard anybody get 5 hours of gameplay time on a Game Gear.
Absolutely not.
Comparatively, the Game Boy, I remember I thought that this was like oil in the temple with the batteries for my Game Boy. Like, they just lasted for 8 days.
Oh yeah, they definitely lasted forever. And I remember even thinking, like, when the power light would come on to tell you that your batteries were low, I'm like, oh, I got plenty of time. I can do this thing and save and blah blah blah. And like, I never had the issue where when you were playing Game Gear, if that light came on and started flashing, you were like, ah, crap! I gotta get somewhere now.
Oh yeah, the anxiety was real. The forehead sweat. Crap.
Oh, yeah.
Not now.
Particularly when playing Lion King, like, oh god, no.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was so hard.
Fantastic. And then with the Game Boy Color, it decreased the amount of batteries it needed. The Game Boy Color only needed 2 batteries. So for a comparison between the Game Boy and the Game Gear, now again, superficial comparison, especially at this point in our lives, but the Game Boy required 33% less batteries for approximately triple to quintuple the battery life, and the Game Boy Color needed 1/3 the batteries for triple to quintuple the battery life. That was not negligible, especially depending where your family was financially. Because I remember there were times where I just didn't play these systems for a long time because we weren't going to go buy batteries.
I will definitely say that where Nintendo directed its R&D was smart. They really focused on the mobile aspect of mobile gaming. Their systems were smaller, easier to carry around, lasted way longer on much fewer batteries. I kind of liked the way that the Color and the Game Gear were spaced out, because I felt like right when the Game Gear was really tipping off for me, when I really wasn't getting into it anymore, around 97, 98, is when the Color came out, and it was a nice just like stepping from one platform to another. Because I remember I got a Color, and I kind of never looked back to a Game Gear. Like, there wasn't ever a time where I was playing both. As soon as I got the Color, I was pretty much done with the Game Gear.
Sorry, I think there's a lag. I was just saying, yeah, I had a similar experience. When I went to Color, I basically didn't go back to it. I think what Josh is talking about with the batteries is largely due to the fact that Game Gear had light and Game Boy Color didn't. But
that was entirely the reason.
Yeah, but with the addition of one of them small magnifying lights or whatever, with the Game Boy Color, I had the little it plugged into the link cable spot, and it was a little spiral thing, and it wasn't exactly the greatest in terms of. Yeah, totally. It wasn't exactly the greatest because it was always kind of either in your way, the device itself was in your way, or the glare was just awful. But overall, it was way more manageable than the Game Gear.
Oh, yeah. Actually, another fun story, speaking of long family car rides, my brother and I used to sit in the very back seat, and we both, when we had Colors, had that same spiral light, but we would twist it at odd angles so as to not get the glare on the screen, but still get some light on the screen. And when we would twist them forward, it would scare the crap out of our father who was driving at night, because he would just see 2 white lights all of a sudden pop up immediately behind him, and he thought somebody was about to slam into the car. So he'd freak out and like swerve over into the next lane. Curse words would be flying, and then my brother and I would pretend to be asleep.
Perfect. That's fantastic.
But anyways, we've been talking a lot about the ins and the outs of the systems themselves. Let's really focus on what sold or didn't sell these systems, and that would be the games. Which isn't to say that the Game Gear didn't have games. Looking it up, there were well over 300 games for the Game Gear. But I know that a lot of them, to me, just seem like ports of games for Sega. Now, you guys had more experience, so can you speak to how I am wrong on this?
So, in my experience, and I don't know like the technical aspects behind what a port is or not, but so I remember the titles being exactly the same as games that I had cartridges for the Genesis, but they weren't the exact same game. Like Wheeler brought up Lion King earlier. Like there was a Lion King for Game Gear and a Lion King for the Genesis, and I had them both. And their levels were like the progression was the same, but their levels were not exactly the same. They weren't simply the same game on a smaller screen. Another one that I can think of was the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers battling game. Like it wasn't verbatim the exact same thing. Minute differences and slight differences in the way they like was maybe it was backgrounds or maybe it was the way the characters moved. But I remember not quite understanding fully what was happening because I thought they were supposed to be the same game, but they didn't feel the same, and they weren't really exactly the same. But I can't put my finger on why they were so different. Wheeler, did you have a simple?
Yeah, what I was going to say is I can actually speak to that. It's because back then they couldn't so much do direct ports. It was a lot more where they had to do conversions. So my best example I can think of is Gunstar Heroes. They had Gunstar Heroes on the Game Gear as well as on the Genesis, but in order to get it to work on the Game Gear properly, they had to trim some stuff out. So they lost like the multiplayer aspects, got cut entirely out. A lot of the higher end, more system intensive graphics and whatnot were cut away. So you were talking about how the backgrounds look different. It's because they actually were different. They trimmed them down in order to make them run smoother on the smaller system. So like with Lion King, Gunstar Heroes, I think the Batman games as well, they trimmed a lot of the backgrounds down and whatnot in order to make them run smoother on the system. They still looked really good, but they weren't as good as what you get on the console.
That makes a lot of sense to me because I remember playing Batman Forever, I think it was, and like it moved fluidly, like there wasn't any lag or anything like that, but the graphics were such that, and maybe again this was a problem with my inability to use the contrast feature, but I remember not exactly knowing how to progress because I really didn't know what the hell I was looking at. Like I knew where Batman was and I knew where enemies were, but the graphics were kind of not clear and blobby, and I was not getting any context clues, that's for sure.
Well, and so you were talking about Batman Forever, right? So Batman Forever was the one that tried to do the like images from the movie that they put into the game. That does not seem like it would translate well to that 141 by 120 pixel screen.
I would like to go back and give it another shot and see, but I would say no. From what I remember, it did not.
For the time, I would say that it was a very interesting idea that, again, at the time, I think translated okay. It wasn't great, but you were like, oh, that was a cool idea. And it was nice that they tried cutscenes, more or less. I didn't play Forever really personally. My brother had it. I didn't try it. I played the Batman Returns games, or game. And that one I thought was a ton of fun. I specifically liked, I still remember that you had just like in the movie, you had the programmable Batarang. So you could like pick 4 or 5 enemies and then you'd throw it and it'd go all over the screen and hit everybody and then come back.
That was the one that was a highly stylized beat 'em up, wasn't it?
Basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that one I remember it looked super awesome even at the time. And yeah, I can't imagine Batman Forever translating super well. A big issue I know with some of those ports, and you didn't see... Well, no, I take that back. Game Boy did have ports, but they were almost always garbage. Just because like the tricks that were available to the Super Nintendo, because the heyday of Game Boy games was really around when the Super Nintendo came out. That's not to say there weren't good games earlier in the Game Boy's life cycle, but that's when you saw the more basic titles like golf or tennis. So when games like Link's Awakening were coming out, those were coming out after Link to the Past. So they had to figure out ways that they could create an experience that was similar without entirely aping the original one, because they knew they couldn't accomplish that. And you saw from what I read, some problems with Game Gear games trying to do that port remake thing for the Game Gear. For example, because of a smaller window size, Sonic 2 supposedly had a lot of blind death falls.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh my god, so much. I had both Sonic the Hedgehog games on Game Gear, but there was one level, and it was on 2, where it was a blind death thing that I rage quit so many times. I can remember being in the car so many times, I'd get to this specific level and just death, screw this, pull it out, rage, throw it on the ground, pull out a different cartridge, play. Generally one of the Illusion games, which I did want to mention as well. There were 3 Illusion games. I think the order was Land of Illusion, Land of Illusion, Castle of Illusion, Legend of Illusion.
Now, these are all Mickey games. Just want to put that out there.
Yes, Sega definitely went whole hog in the 90s on the Disney correlation. Some other notables real quick would be like Lion King and Aladdin. Lion King being the Dark Souls of its day. And I would like to point out, I did beat it, so haha.
Those games did come out on Super Nintendo, though. They were different.
Well, yeah, these weren't, what's the word I want? Exclusives, thank you. They weren't exclusives, but they were definitely games that Game Gear was like, look what we can do. We've got a great correlation with Disney. Big ones, the Illusion games. They were essentially Super Mario World, but with a Disney skin. Up to and including the fact that Mickey Mouse threw apples at enemies. And it was a lot of... He bounced on top of the enemies' heads in order to, quote-unquote, kill them, or threw apples at the bigger enemies to take them down. But... I think it was a lot of what led into, what's that game that you all love that I'm not a fan of? Kingdom Hearts.
I was more a fan of that about 15 years ago, but continue.
I think the Illusion games is as close as I ever got to that style of game, where it had the Disney characters and everything in it, but it did not feel like a quote-unquote Disney game. You still felt like you were playing like I said, a Mario game, a real platformer. It felt like a fun game. It wasn't, just for small children. I was playing this when I was 11, 12 years old. So, and it really captured my interest. So I was a big fan of these. I think, as I remember, a lot of people in their top 10 lists list all 3 of these games. They were phenomenal. Also, like I said, Lion King. You could burn a ton of time playing Lion King. I think one of those legs of the journey I was talking about for 9 hours, all I did was play that Lion King game and finally defeat it. It took me 9 hours. And that was for a handheld game in like 95.
All right. How about you, Derek?
I'm impressed that Wheeler beat that game. I don't think I could do that even today. So kudos to you. I never played the Mickey games for Game Gear, sadly. I don't know how, with as big a Disney fan as I am, that I skipped over those. I guess I had a lot of the ports. I remember playing things like Echo the Dolphin, which was hard as balls. There was one Sonic game that I remember playing that wasn't a port, sort of a standalone title that was pretty decent. Can't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
Triple Trouble, Labyrinth, or Chaos?
Chaos.
There you go.
I would have put my money on Chaos. I think that was the best of those.
Chaos was pretty good. Some of my titles have gone missing, or I've gotten rid of them over the years, but yeah, I mean, I can't really recall any that were like...
Did you have the Strike games, Desert Strike and Jungle Strike? It was a top-down flight sim shooter where you flew like a little Apache helicopter and shot enemies and whatnot.
I think I remember playing it. I don't think I ever personally had it. I had more games like I remember for some reason Zoop was a big thing. Do you remember Zoop?
Why does that sound... Did you roll a ball around a checkerboard?
No, I don't think so. This was it was just like random. To be honest, I don't remember how. It was like a 3-dimensional Tetris or something like that, where there was like different colors. Yeah, Zoop. I can't remember, but it was supposed to be like, it was like a big thing for the Game Gear.
Columns was supposed to be.
Boo, Columns.
Well, Columns was a good one, yeah. But I remember Zoop came out later, and they were like pushing it real hard.
Apparently, Zoop came out because I remember vaguely I'd have no idea what's going on here. I'm looking at screenshots of it right now, and it came out on a ton of different systems. It did come out on Game Boy, apparently. I mean, look at that. Zoop.
Oh,
this is nothing to me.
Yeah, no, don't recall that one at all.
Huh. Yeah, look, here's a game. Like, what? It's like some weird Chinese checkers thing going on here.
Yeah, it's weird. It's just randomly different color shapes or something like that.
Huh. Anyways, I did also reach out to frequent contributor to the show, Nick Krause, because he played Game Gear quite a lot. And he mentioned that while the Game Gear did have a smaller set. What they focused on was Genesis games and try to miniaturize them rather than strip them down like the Game Boy would do. Some examples being there was a Shining Force game, a Golden Axe game, a Oasis game, and as Derek mentioned, Echo. There was a game called Dynamite Headdy. I guess I know Ristar, which was a platformer for the Genesis, was also on the Game Gear. It sounds like there were quality titles. It's just, I think, between a combination of I'm not sure if I ever was purchased a portable system as a child, and the fact that this was just an incredibly inaccessible system. Personally, 6 AAA batteries is rough.
It is
Well,
rough.
I think
it's a very...
Oh, go ahead, Derek.
I was just going to say, one of the things that surprised me about it is how many ports or conversions, as Mike called them, that they really did. Because there was also a technology where you could play Sega Genesis cartridges. And then the later, I know we're not talking about the next gen of it, which was essentially the last one, but the Nomad actually took Sega Genesis cartridges. So it really seemed overly reiterative at that point.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to bring up the fact that the Genesis definitely had stronger peripherals than the Game Boy did, which isn't to say that the Game Boy was...
The Game Gear had stronger peripherals.
Yeah, sorry. The Game Gear had stronger peripherals because while the Game Boy did have a lot of third-party things, like we all laughed at the magnifying glass light combo that we owned. There was also, you could like put extra speakers onto it. Like you could make a Game Boy like 7 times the size it normally was. I know I've seen
that up.
Right? I've seen memes. This isn't even my final form. There's like 7 things attached to it. But the only ones that come to mind for the Game Boy was the Game Boy camera and the Game Boy printer, which
those were so dumb.
They were crazy dumb. And
yep, had them both.
Of course you did. But the Game Gear, as you mentioned... Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying I never used them very much. A couple of friends of mine, when my dad was playing softball, had a good old little bit of a time with the Game Boy camera and making stickers with the printer, but I don't think I ever bought more than the original 3 rolls of paper that came with the printer. And it also itself took 6 batteries, so...
Oh, God. I didn't even know this Nomad was a thing. Huh.
Oh, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, my cousins had a Nomad, and I don't even remember it being advertised. Not that I remember Game Gear being advertised, but I never got a Nomad. Everything felt like it was declining at that point for Sega in the handheld arena.
Yeah, it felt like it was kind of a throw it at a wall and see what sticks. This thing is ugly. Anyways, the Game Gear had both that attachment you mentioned that allowed it to play most cartridges on the Game Gear, and it also, though I don't know anybody who owned it and I don't know how often you would use it, there was a TV tuner.
Yes, that thing was awesome.
Did you both own that?
I think I did have it, but I don't know if I ever knew how to get it to work. I don't think I ever successfully used it.
Oh, well, la-ti-da. Listen to Mr. Man over there that's always had cable television.
Sorry.
I stood on top of a neighbor's roof with a tin foil.
I can remember standing outside in the rain holding a freaking metal spike up in the air, hoping to get struck by electricity so that maybe we could get channel 4. I had to walk uphill both ways.
There we go.
Oh, I thought you wanted to get struck by lightning so that your Game Gear battery life would last another 5 minutes.
I'm about to say, hope to give you magic powers. You static shock this thing so you can run it for 6 hours.
I think, especially back then, it was more a gimmick than anything else. But what's wrong with a gimmick? It was fun.
If it works, but, I mean, and...
Again, I will say, because it was a gimmick, it's not something I would have used regularly by any means. It was more like, oh, cool. But again, because it's a mobile platform, the only time it's really worth using is when you're on the go. When you're moving around, your signal doesn't stay in the same place. So you could only watch the same channel for like 30 minutes, and then you were out of range, and it went bad again. So
awesome. But
maybe that's why I never had success with it. I never thought I never wanted to watch TV if I couldn't watch what I wanted to watch. So that's why I never used mine.
Threw it on the ground.
Yeah.
Anyways, so the thing that we're really focusing, I'm still not seeing us really get away from the fact that a lot of the Game Gear games, while they may have been technically superior, really did just seem like miniature versions, which isn't to say there weren't original things. I know there was a Mega Man Game Gear game that essentially combined Mega Man 4 and 5. Didn't have that on Game Boy, didn't have that on any other system. So, but that being said, the Mega Man games for the Game Boy, on the other hand, they had, I'm not sure, I think they had unique bosses. I'm not positive on that. No. They had unique level design, and there were things called the Mega Man Killers. So they were basically the penultimate robots. Near the end of the game, there were robots that were only in these Game Boy versions, and in later Mega Man games, there were unique robots because you had to fight like robots that represented planets in the solar system. Just really,
that's interesting.
It was interesting. It was very different. But the one game, and this is one of the things that is brought up constantly about why Nintendo, other than the fact in the late 80s to mid 90s, Nintendo was ubiquitous with gaming. Like, they single-handedly brought gaming back from the collapse of the like late Atari, when it was so saturated and there was no quality control. There was an enormous game collapse before we were born.
Wasn't that around the time of that stupid E.T. game?
Yeah. That was one of the the final seals before just gaming collapsed.
Yeah, because they were stupid with their logistics. Didn't they print more editions of that game than editions of the system existed?
They were far too ambitious for a game that didn't receive proper QA. But anyways, when the Game Boy came out, they packaged in a game that has become synonymous with not only that handheld, but a lot of addictive gaming in general, which would be Tetris. The attach rate for Tetris was 1 in every 5 Game Boys had that game. And that's over the entire life of it. So, everybody knows Tetris, everybody knows the Tetris song, everybody can enjoy a little bit of Tetris. And something else that I think, Pokemon, huge mover.
Oh, and I will say absolutely. Like, that's what did it for me. I was going to say that earlier. That was when I made my move. The color came out in 1998, towards the end of 98, and that was right around the same time that the yellow edition of Pokemon came out, the third one. And I bought those together, and that was an instant addiction hook. The software for Nintendo, definitely, even as a fan of the Game Gear, Nintendo software, way better. They had a lot of games for the Game Gear, but I'd say only maybe 20, maybe 30 of them were actually good. The rest of them, not phenomenal. The Nintendo, Pokemon, and those Oracle games for Link alone, what was it, Oracle of Ages?
Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. Yes.
I would have bought a color just for those 3 games. There was a bunch of other games that were great. I even remember like Mario Golf and Mario Tennis. Those were a lot of fun. They just had great games. Like, that was where they figured out their formula, was with the color. I feel like from that point forward, they had mobile gaming figured out. They had the right formula.
Derek, what do you think?
I would just echo the same thing. When Pokemon came out, that pretty much became everything in terms of mobile gaming to me. And then there was a lag where I picked up some other things, but following the Zelda franchise, the Oracle games were obviously in there. But after that, I didn't do a whole lot of portable gaming per se. I tried to get back into some like Mario's and things like that later on, but it was pretty much Pokemon from then on out for me. And I did buy the yellow Game Boy. The Pokemon Edition Game Boy, so that was one of the 3 that I had for the Game Boy Color. Yeah, so basically, I'm just going to echo what Mike says here.
Yeah, and the Game Boy Color, that's where you saw a lot of game. I don't know. I feel like I had more Game Boy Color games than I did Game Boy games, partially because you could just play Game Boy games on the Game Boy Color, something that Nintendo has always been very, very strong about doing backward compatibility for the most part. Just going off real fast, the Game Boy Color could play Game Boy games. I know that the Advance could play Game Boy Color and I think Game Boy games. Not positive on that. I know it could at least do color games.
Yeah, I know you could still play color games on the Game Boys all the way up until, was it the first DS?
Yeah, I don't think the DS could play anything older than Game Boy Advance.
Yeah.
So anyways, Nintendo's always been pretty good about that kind of support, and I'm not saying that the Game Gear was bad because that's unfair. I did not have any experience with it. But I think that at the time, and especially for a few years after they discontinued it, people were unfairly harsh on the Game Gear.
I think it's a matter of, the victors write the history.
Yeah.
And Nintendo was clearly the victor. I would like to point out in doing my research for this episode, I found out that the Game Gear sold just shy of 11 million units over its lifespan, making it the second best competitor to the Game Boy of all time, only being outsold by the PSP.
So you said 11 million units?
Just shy of 11 million. It was like 10.96 or something like that is what I remember.
Okay, let's see. Derek, what final thoughts do you have for this as well?
I think that Wheeler hit the nail on the head there, where it's, the case of the victors writing the history. So, I mean, I love my Game Gear. It had its technological disadvantages and whatnot, but I still like it. I still played it the other day whenever you and I started talking about it, and I still get the enjoyment out of it that I did back then. But, Nintendo's got it figured out way better than anybody else does. So clearly that was all their what?
Oh no, you're right. Nintendo's got it on lock.
Real quick point of order here in order to please the gaming nerds. I was incorrect on the number of units sold. It was actually 10.62 million. So, yes, I have discovered the right number. It was 10.62 million units sold. However, I was correct that the only non-Nintendo mobile unit to outsell it was the PSP. The more you know.
The reason I wanted that specific number was because, just for a point of reference, the Wii U sold 13.5 million units.
So the Game Gear sold almost as many units as the Wii U.
Yeah, it sold about 20% less, but for a handheld that came out in the early 90s, that's very significant.
It was impressive overall.
Yeah, it was definitely more impressive than it was ever given credit for, but couldn't have put it better. The winners write the history books, but that doesn't mean we should neglect something like as significant as the Game Gear was. All right, you about good on your side, Derek?
I think that's all I've got.
All right, Mike, you good?
Yep.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, I would like to thank both of you for coming on. Mike, thank you very much.
Well, always.
Derek, thank you very much for coming on.
Hey, love to be here when I can.
Hey-o. So why don't you get online and tell us, what did you think about the Game Gear? Did you think that it was significantly ahead of its time? Did you think that its ports didn't justify the amount of effort that went into this system? Do you think that the Game Boy Color absolutely blew the Game Gear out of the water? Do you think that it was silly to even compare the Game Gear to Nintendo as was? Let us know. But until next time, my name is Josh, and this is Co Opinions.